population. Joining me now is Adam Hancock, who's a journalist who is in Taipei, in Taiwan, and has been, is still covering the elections. Adam, so thank you so much for your time. As I said, you are in Taipei. A lot of people in the West will probably think, well, what have these elections got to do with us? How will they affect us? But they will affect relations with not only the USA, but the rest of Europe. So what is the result looking like? What's the final result looking like?
It looks like the current party, the ruling DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, it looks like their candidate Lai Ching-te, sorry, it's been a long day here. He is going to be successful. It will be the first time that the same party has had a presidential candidate in office for 3 terms in a row. The other 2 main opposition parties, they have both conceded this evening, and we've had a bit of a victory speech from Lai. So it looks like the DPP are going to continue remaining in power here in Taiwan.
Now, Mr. Lai's a really interesting character. He's a former doctor whose father was a miner who was killed in a fall. And as a result, Mr. Lai, even though he came from very, very humble poverty, poor background, trained to be an expert in spinal injuries. So again, he is really a person of the people. How do you think China, has there been any talk about how China will react to this result?
Well, China don't like him, and they've made that very clear. And a lot of that is based on previous comments that Lai has made about Taiwanese independence. China call him a troublemaker. They've called him a separatist, and they have warned, or before the polling today, they warned voters against backing him in this election. I don't think they will react particularly well to these results. They're not in favour of the DPP. Traditionally, the opposition party here, the KMT, would have ties with Beijing, compared with, we'll get quite a few strongly worded statements in the coming days. And what we have seen in the past here is when China is not happy with events in Taiwan, I'm thinking back to, you might remember when the former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she visited Taiwan, I think it was about 2 years ago now, and China was not happy about that. And they decided to go ahead and hold military drills in the Taiwan Strait. Effectively, there is a sense that perhaps we will see some kind of military drills in the Taiwan Strait in the coming months. He won't actually be inaugurated, Lai, until May. So perhaps then, when the weather is set fair, there potentially could be some military action from China. But I'm sure we'll hear from them, and there'll be some pretty strong statements if their past statements are anything to go by.
There still seems, though, to be a feeling from the US that China won't go as far as actually invading Taiwan. They will just keep up and ramp up the intimidation of Taiwan. And it seems that China's tactic very much is to frighten the population into either ousting or voting somebody else in. Now, it didn't work this time, so it suggests they're going to have to, up their game.
I think everybody is well aware that if China was to take
sorry, I mean, Adam, we're trying and get you back on the phone because, as I said before, we're talking to Adam in Taiwan. Obviously, the line isn't brilliant there. You know, what I want to talk to him about is what will happen as far as China basically trying to frighten the population into making a decision that they haven't made this time. It would be very difficult for a population where they've had a government whose its whole raison d'etre is to make life easier for people, is to look after the elderly and have institutions that look after the elderly, to encompass LGBTQ, to promote and keep safe indigenous populations, which most people don't even think about. But as I said before, Tsai Ing-wen came from that background and so looked after those people. Adam, thank you. We've got you back now. Just talking about China's going to have to up the ante, but the Taiwanese people now have got very used to a life that runs, you know, although they don't want to completely split from China, for instance, with LGBTQ, with indigenous people, with the relative sort of freedom of religious, you know, people can follow who they want to follow, etc., etc. I mean, now this has been going on for a good generation. However much, you know, frightening tactics China's going to do, the people of Taiwan have a hell of a lot to give up in order to concede to China, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, you only have to look at the scenes today. I was out and about. I spent a lot of time outside a polling station earlier today. People were queuing out the door. People love their democracy here. There's huge election rallies. I went to one last night at a stadium. Thousands of people cheering and dancing, you know, the sort of stuff we would never see in the United Kingdom at election time. And today I was at the polling station, people were coming up to me and thanking me for covering the election, smiling and waving. Wow. So democracy is hugely important to people here. And as you said, that kind of the events we saw today, you just wouldn't ever see in China. And people are well aware of that. And I've actually seen a few Taiwanese voters today on social media just really saying how happy they are and how proud they are of their democracy and how their system just is incompatible with the system in China. So they're well aware that they have a very different lifestyle here, a lot more freedom. There's a lot more press freedom as well. And there's real understanding that, you know, it wouldn't work with the China system. So it will be interesting to see what China does. Often when they step up intimidation tactics, we've seen people actually go and vote for the DPP. It happened 4 years ago when China was trying to implement the national security law in Hong Kong that you might remember. And that actually saw the DPP win with a landslide because people were concerned that something similar could happen there. So when the intimidation and the threats come, it seems that the public here go towards the Democratic Progressive Party.
Oh, one of the things that we shouldn't forget is the industrial might, for such a small place, the industrial might of Taiwan, when it comes to computers, and they are very, very advanced in technology, in industry and what have you. So they're pretty much a jewel that China wants to reclaim. But China's in a precarious position because they want power, but they can't afford to upset Taiwan too much because there are a lot of things that are manufactured in China that require parts from Taiwan or completion in Taiwan.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the big thing here is semiconductor chips. Some of the most advanced semiconductor chips in the world are produced in Taiwan, and it's, you know, they're in everything, our cars, our mobile phones, all of our technology. So that's vitally important. The USA is well aware of that. China is well aware of that as well. So yeah, it certainly would be of interest to China, and it would be of real concern to the rest of the world if China was to be in control of that technology and those chips. So it's another factor to kind of throw into the equation here of why so many countries around the world are looking so closely at this election, purely because of what it could mean for the future of Taiwan's relations with China. And if things do get worse, will China, you know, step up their military drills? Will they step up any military action? And that's the big fear of everybody watching this election very closely.
Absolutely. And what you talking about countries watching the election, of course, Japan as well, because Japan has a fairly good relationship with Taiwan. They and also, you know, they once upon a time, didn't they, occupied, well, they, you know, owned Taiwan at the moment, but they a lot of people have Japanese ancestry as well. So they too will be looking very closely, and I'm sure cheering on the results of this election.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's plenty of regional interest from Japan, from South Korea as well. Countries all in this region who have their own concerns about China. You know, China have been stepping up their military aggression in this part of the world. You might have heard about what's been happening in the South China Sea. And what is actually really interesting in this part of the world is it almost feels like it's getting close to reaching boiling point, because you've got China becoming increasingly confident, increasingly assertive. And then you've also got the United States really strengthening their bonds with countries here like Japan, like the Philippines, Australia as well, and building their military defenses in this part of the world. So if there was ever to be a stage where there was some kind of conflict between Washington and Beijing, it would probably take place in this part of the world. And Taiwan could be the major flashpoint between both of them. So I think that's why, you know, we started this conversation with you saying, why should people care about the Taiwanese elections? It sounds like a small occasion that people wouldn't really care about in the West, but one day there could be, you know, huge consequences of any kind of conflict here, really.
Well, when you say why should people in the West care already, you know, when you talk about the chips that are in absolutely everything, all the electric cars, for instance, I mean, people sadly only care when they can't, you know, when there are no new parts for their phones or their cars or their electronics and all those sorts of things. So any disruption to Taiwan, they'd certainly sit up and take notice.
Yes. Absolutely, yeah, and I think I don't quote me on this because I could be wrong, but I think I read something the other day that was saying if there was to be a war between China and Taiwan, the global economic fallout would actually be worse than what happened at the start of COVID, when obviously, you know, economies went into lockdown and there was huge, you know, stock market sell-offs and everything along those lines. And if there was to be a conflict here, it could actually be even worse in terms of the global economy. Just through the Taiwan Strait, there's a huge amount of shipping every day. And obviously, if China, the world's biggest economy, gets involved in the conflict, that's going to have a knock-on effect for everybody as well.
It's scary, isn't it? The number of flashpoints. China's got a lot on its plate, though, hasn't it? I mean, it's got its relationship with Russia and how it feels about Ukraine, and then there's what's happening in the Middle East and where they've positioned themselves there. They're having to fight fires, you know, political fires and image fires on many fronts. I'm guessing that's why the US doesn't think that China will go beyond making themselves, you know, monstering Taiwan. They don't think at this stage that China will do anything else, purely because China's got its hands full.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that's worth mentioning with why the United States are, I wouldn't say confident, but are assuming that there won't be any imminent threat, is because of the situation with the economy in China as well. There's been, you know, difficulties in the economy there since they obviously went through the COVID zero years. That coming out of that, there's not been the rebound that everybody expected in the Chinese property market. Some of the biggest real estate developers are having their own issues. So are China really in a strong enough position when they've got problems at home and, as you said, all of these problems that they're trying to deal with abroad as well? Are they in a position really to go into conflict? Although I'm sure China will have been watching closely, for example, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I'm sure they would have been looking at that, looking at the international reaction, how much support Ukraine got from countries in the West, and considering if it was to be China and Taiwan rather than Russia and Ukraine, would it be a similar playbook? So I think when that initial conflict started a couple of years ago, people in Taiwan were very concerned that it could be them next. And actually, Russia doing that could give China the confidence to go ahead and try to, what China calls a reunify with Taiwan. So yeah, it does appear, and the analysts and the experts and the US military, they don't think any kind of military action would be imminent. But with a country like China, it's very hard to predict what's coming next. There's very little access, as you'll know, So watch this space and certainly watch their reaction in the coming days to this result tonight.
Well, as you say, the people are literally dancing in the streets, so we'll let you go out there and join them. Thank you so much for that. Adam Hancock there, who's a journalist covering the Taiwan elections. And if you asked why you should be concerned, I think we've just answered those questions for you. We'll be back with more in a moment.